Bum, bum. Welcome, friends. Whatever you're doing with your time, it's not going to be as fun as what you're about to do now. We are currently reading through the Summa Theologica by St. Thomas Aquinas. We're having group discussions and a real good time. For those of you who are new to this, we also have, let's pull it up here, a website with all of the classes that we've done so far. Lots of graphs and stuff to illustrate what's going on. And we are just starting the simplicity of God section. And we did our class on whether or not God has a body. In the meantime, we are reading some supplementary works. Here is C.S. Lewis's The Discarded Image, which we've put into a group of classes to understand the way the medievals thought about the cosmos. And this book is kind of blowing my mind. I remembered it being good, but I must not have gotten out of it what I needed as much as I could have back the first time. So this is really a heck of a fun time getting to get into it. And so we're reading through that. And we've done a bunch of other philosophical content from a Platonic inclination that's related to arguments that Aquinas made for or against what he was thinking. And we've read a 4 hour and 45 minutes of awesome Aristotelian excerpts that illustrate the way Aquinas is thinking. And so, yeah, there's summations and formalizations and external links. Let's make this full screen. There we go. And so now what we're going to do is continue reading where we left off. There's suggested essays that you can submit through the website. Hopefully soon there's going to be a way for people to comment on each other's comments, and we can write essays and respond to things that way. There's a lot of graphs illustrating the full text of the Summa Theologica is here in white as we read through it. Graphs and illustrations of the way he thought. And a few things have started to emerge in these classes. We've started to understand that, well, the first thing that's coming up for me actually is the fact that Aquinas is like a tent, like a big, massive, super circus tent or something right in the middle of the Middle Ages that pulls in pre-Socratics and contemporary philosophers today, and we get to sort of watch them all duke it out in real time together. That's been a lot of fun. The insights from the discarded image have been pretty awesome. There's slideshows and stuff on here also. I probably scrolled past it, should have mentioned it, but anyway. To remind ourselves what St. Thomas Aquinas does in the Summa Theologica, it's divided into a few parts. Those parts are separated into treatises with a number of questions in them. The first treatise was on sacred doctrine, which dealt with the question of, is there a way of coming to truths other than basing them in human reason? Because what St. Thomas Aquinas is going to do here is philosophy, and he's going to see what truths he can get to through just human reason and everything based in that. But before doing that, he's saying, well, what about divine revelation? And wouldn't that be a fine thing to do as well? It's just not what we're going to do here. And so he had 10 questions that he dealt with. So these treatises are divided into questions. The questions are divided into what are called articles. So there were 10 articles, I should say, under that first question, which makes up the first treatise. Now we're in the treatise on the one God. Before we move on to the Trinity, creation, distinction of things in general, distinction of good and evil, treatise on angels, treatise on the work of the 6 days, on man, and on conservation and government of creatures. And that makes up the first part. So we're on the treatise on the one God, and we've gotten through the existence of God questions, where those 3 articles had to do with whether or not the idea that God is real is self-evident, that God exists is self-evident, and he doesn't side with that idea. although he leaves a little bit open for it, where he says maybe perhaps that kind of argument could work for a very learned person. I don't know, but he says it would have to be demonstrated if there was if there was an argument for God's existence. You can't just say a priori or by definition in that sense. And then he dealt with whether or not it could be demonstrated. And he said, I think it actually could be. And then he went forward with 5 ways of trying to demonstrate it. And that makes up the 3 articles. Now we're on this really interesting idea of the simplicity of God. And we talked about the fact that philosophical simplicity is a much underrated, and actually it's probably one of the least understood philosophical concepts, and it's extremely important. So in our last video, we looked at philosophical simplicity for the first time when we did the whether God is a body section. And so that video is there. But now we're going to continue with the next 7 articles. We'll see how far we get inside of this question, which is the second question inside the treatise on the one God, which is making up the Summa Theologica. So let's go ahead and do that now. So treatise on the one God. Oops, why don't we just click on the simplicity of God? So this notion of the simplicity of God we talked about last time. Let's have a sip. This idea is, I don't think you can understand the argument for God's existence in the third meditation of Descartes. I've mentioned a few really important passages in philosophy. We read some excerpts from the Phaedo. I think that some of the most cryptic and sort of like, what is that about kind of passages in Plato can be understood if you understand this idea of simplicity. So the idea of simplicity is that something is not composite. That's what it means. It means it's not made up of parts. To say that something is simple means there's no north and south, there's no left and right, there's no top and bottom, there's no composition where it's made up of multiple molecules or anything like that. And so one of the things we're going to see from these philosophers of theology who are trying to understand God from a foundation of human reason rather than on the path of revelation, which doesn't mean that they're not open to that path as well and all that. But while they're doing philosophy, is that they'll talk about the attributes of God. In other words, we, in our limited, mutable, composite, mortal, terrestrial realm, look up at the divine and we attribute things to him. We're attributing. In other words, we're saying God is love, God has mercy, God has justice, God is just, God is merciful, God is all knowing, God is all powerful. We can attribute things to God. But the philosophical concept of simplicity says that even though our minds can't wrap themselves around this entire divinity concept, if we could, which we can't do, we would understand that God's mercy is God's justice, is God's all-knowingness, is God's infinity or eternality. All of the things that we're attributing, it's like we're looking up like ants through different lenses of facets surrounding, like through a window, a thing that we're talking about. But the thing that we're talking about is actually simple. And one of the reasons for the importance of this idea, I had mentioned Descartes earlier, and we talked about this in the last video, so I won't talk about it too much, is that things that are not composite, anything that is composite can be decomposed. So in the last video, we just dealt with the first article of this question, whether God has a body, and he gave us, like he always does, arguments against the position he has, and then his statement, quoting Aristotle or whatever, not making an argument, but his statement of what he actually thinks, and then his logic-based argument, and then his replies to the objections. So we went through that last time. Today, we're going to start with the next article. But if something is composed, it can be decomposed. God is not like that. God doesn't have a body, according to Aquinas. We have metaphors in scripture that are helping us. God's arm is long. That's a true statement, but it's a true statement that is made to people who can't understand the concept in anything better than an allegorical form, which is us. And that's very profound and very deep. There's nothing limiting about the allegorical form necessarily. But the metaphor, God stands to address something. God's sits in judgment. Having posture and having body parts and things like that are not meant to be read literally, according to this medieval thinker. And I think it goes along with the Aristotelian ancients who, in the ancient time, the Aristotelian essays that we were reading. So the idea of God's simplicity is interesting because the fact that you have that idea at all, the fact that even before we get into the idea of whether or not God exists, this is Descartes' point, the idea that you can have a notion of a simple thing that's all powerful and all knowing and all just, and just your idea of God is all he's talking about. It doesn't make sense that you could have that idea. And this is a similar move to the one that Socrates made when he was arguing about the immortality of the soul. He says, you have access to ideas that you have no right to have. That idea itself shouldn't exist because everything you've ever experienced is composite. Everything you've ever experienced is mortal or temporal or limited or owes its explanation to other things that are sufficient to cause it to be. Then you can imagine a gold mountain because you've interacted with gold and you've interacted with mountains, but you've never, supposedly, you've never interacted with something like this. So how do you have the notion in the first place? And Socrates to make a point about the immortality of the soul, and Descartes to prove God's existence, make the point that there must be something like that, and it has left an imprint on you. And you do know that there is a way of being that's unlike what you know yourself to be and everything else you've ever experienced. And in order to make those arguments in both cases, you can find in the text both Socrates and Plato and Descartes making uh, an empirical commitment. They're saying we only get ideas into our mind through our senses, through things we've interacted with. Where do we get this idea from? And so just the idea itself is a it's a very powerful idea that makes arguments which don't seem like they might work to be much more powerful than they look at first appearance, but understanding the concept of simplicity is necessary. So, the other thing we talked about as we got into this section was Aquinas's notion that we can't know anything about God directly. In other words, in a positive sense. In other words, let's put it this way, actually, to not put words in his mouth or to be misleading about it. Any propositional positive statement I make about God is using words, and words are limiting, but that we're talking about the unlimited. So in a sense, they're wrong. Maybe they're partially aiming at something, and maybe the poetry can help us aim at something or whatever. But to do his philosophy, he wants to do apophatic philosophy. And the idea is I'm going to make negative statements about God. I'm going to say God is not a body. Okay, so there's a statement that can just be true. God is not a body. God is not composed, right? So as he makes these negative statements, he's saying, what if I were to clear out potentially wrong ideas that I have about the nature of the divine or about the essence of the divine? Let's put it that way for now. And if I get rid of the wrong ideas, what I'm left with is at least something closer to possibly what I actually should be trying to get at. Now, he's not saying this is the only way to do it, but he's saying that philosophically, this is what he's going to do. He's going to do this philosophical project and see how far he can get. And so far, we are up to the point where there is a divine and he's simple. And that's the first thing he's dealing with. So let's go ahead and read this section. Whether God is composed of matter and form. Now we've gotten used to this. He's going to give us arguments he doesn't believe from objectors who might argue the opposite. So let's see. It seems that God is composed of matter and form. For whatever has a soul is composed of matter and form, right? Look at all the examples you have of ensouled things, things that are animated, that have an anima, that can motivate them. Those are all things you could also point to and touch and say they're in a location and you could weigh them. Like those are our examples of things that are souled. Since the soul is the form of the body, okay, we'll get back to that again maybe, but we've already looked at some Plato and some Aristotle to see how he's thinking here. And so for Aristotle, the organizational principle of expressing what you are in the world is the soul in a sense, and maybe it's a double helix. Like maybe it's something like that, like the information in the code or something like that. But whatever it is, the connection between body and soul is that things that have souls, you know that they do because of how they're acting or how they're manifesting themselves in the world. You know it through their bodies. So, but Scripture attributes a soul to God. For it is mentioned in Hebrews. where God says, "But my just man liveth by faith." Father, help us. "But my just man liveth by faith, but if he withdraw himself, he shall not please my soul. Therefore, God is composed of matter and form." So the argument he's going to say is wrong is that in order to have a soul, you must be embodied because that's what we know of. Whatever has a soul is made up of matter and form, and that the scriptures say God has a soul. Further, anger, joy, and the like are passions of the composite, but these are attributed to God in scripture. The Lord was exceedingly angry with his people. Therefore, God is composed of matter and form. Okay. If you're looking for something angry, you can't think of an abstract concept being angry. You can't be like the quadratic equation is angry, right? Things that are not embodied are not angry. And those things are always bodies and they're always composite. You would think that this might be dealt with in the body section, but he's very subtle. He's going to allow for a lot of distinctions for arguments both against and for his position as he responds to them. Okay, further, matter is the principle of individualization, but God seems to be an individual, for he cannot be predicated of many. Therefore, he is composed of matter and form. Okay. The limiting quality of being material has something to do with existing eh, as we understand it, is what this objector's saying. And so, but to be made of matter is to be made up of more than one thing that's coming together, organized, and going through processes. You can't be getting these sophisticated things unless you've got some composition. On the contrary, he says. So he's just going to give us his statement now. Whatever is composed of matter and form is a body. For dimensive quantity is the first property of matter. All right, so the definition of body, what he means by body here, is being given to us in the text. It's length, breadth, and width. And that's the first property of matter, at least. But God is not a body, as was proved in the last section in the preceding article. Therefore, he is not composed of matter and form. All right. So let's see how he makes this argument. I answer that it is impossible that matter should exist in God. First, I answer that it is impossible that matter should exist in God. First, because matter is in potentiality. But as we have already shown in question 2, article 3, God is pure ac- activity, not potentiality, without any potentiality. Hence, it is impossible that God, and of course, we say the word activity, and that's of course complicated because we're not talking about in time in the way that in our terrestrial realm we think about it. Obviously, we'll get to that in another article in the future. But hence, it is impossible that God should be composed of matter and form. Secondly, because everything composed of matter and form owes its perfection and goodness to its form, therefore, its goodness is participated, inasmuch as matter participates, or yeah, participates the form. Now, the first good and the best, viz., God, the thing we're talking about here, is not a participated good because the essential good is prior to the participated good. I think that what we're relying on are things that are going to be proven in future articles here, but let's follow the logic and hold any questions we have in the meantime about all of this to see he will be addressing them in the future. The idea is just like with motion, everything you've ever seen in life is put into motion by other bodies, by sufficient causes to put them into motion. An infinite regress of that, it means we have no explanation for why anything could move at all. An answer to the Parmenidean problem from Aquinas is, yeah, sure we do. That therefore there must be something that is not like that. And actuality is prior to potentiality. It seems like the potential to fall over is actualized when the previous domino falls into it. That's true of everything in our terrestrial globe. Everything that we can do science with, everything that makes science possible in the first place is assuming that we're dealing with something that isn't God, that we're dealing with something that works that way. But none of that makes sense, including the idea that we could use science to make sense and look for sufficient causes, unless there's something that's not like that, unless there's a prime mover. So we have God that way. Now, analogously, the same thing is true of good. all things that could become good. That's a good tree. That's a better tree. That's a tree that has the potential to be even better. And here I'm watering it so it can grow. They have a certain amount of potentiality and they're actualizing what they can to approach their approximation or participation. I'm not sure. We'll leave that open right now. Their approximation or participation in the good, which comes from a source, and that source is God. As we looked with the ancients, the arche, the source of all good being truth, justice, love. This is what we mean by the word God. We've understood that it must exist. Now we're understanding that now this could be a reverse engineered argument for the existence of God. If there is good, well, we won't make up arguments that don't exist in this text, but you can see trying to use that exact same logic and see what that might get you. Is participated good, it's participating in the good, right? So there is the good qua good. All right. And then there's all the things that manifest whatever degree their potentiality allows them to actualize participation in the good, because the essential good is prior to the participated good. Okay. The essential good, and we can go back at Plato. I mean, I know that we're talking about a scholastic here, and we know that we're looking at the division of ideas, and it's very Aristotelian, but whenever we get a chance, we're going to highlight and point out the fact that there's some Platonicness in all of this. Um, I've sent out the link on X. So if you're watching on X, you can join us on the live stream and have this conversation with us, by the way. Hence, it is impossible that God should be composed of matter and form. Thirdly, so he's got a third argument, because every agent acts by its form, hence the manner in which it has its form in the manner in which it is an agent. Therefore, whatever is primarily and essentially an agent must be primarily and essentially form. Now, God is the first agent, since he is the first efficient cause. He is therefore of his essence a form and not composed of matter and form. Okay, we've gotten rid of matter. So he's making a negative statement. God is not made of matter. God is not composed. God does not have a body. So he's saying not only does he not have a body, but there's no composition to him, no material. The terminology we have for manifested mattery stuffness is not a property of God. Reply to objection 1: a soul is attributed to God because his acts resemble the acts of a soul, for that we will anything is due to our soul. Hence, what is pleasing to his will is said to be pleasing to his soul. This is a common objection or response to objections where the only evidence for the argument is obviously poetic uh scripture. So if Holy Writ you don't lose anything. It's not like we're saying, well, let's minimize that verse. It's like, no, let's highlight that verse and put it in bold, glowing neon letters across the sky. That's a great verse. Obviously, you're missing the point of that verse if you think God's arm is long is meant to say, if you measured it, it would be, whoa, what an arm. Like you're missing the point of what obviously is meant by that poetry. Or that metaphor or that literary device in a mythopoetic way of trying to get us to a truth that is maybe perhaps coming from God condescending to us and revealing to us. How else could he say a more true statement to us? What could be more true than the statement he makes? If you're distracted by a literalness of it and you're making silly posts on X going, oh, God has an arm. Oh, but he made matter on the third day or some other misunderstanding of everything and saying, well, that's a contradiction. You missed the point as much as somebody who maybe, according to Aquinas, is a very devout religious person who's saying, I'm reading in the scripture. It says he has an arm. I imagine he has two. It's like, yeah, you are an approximation of him in his image. He has agency, he has capacity to affect things. It's not meant to be taken in the way that you would never read any other profound truth in that had that literary device. Okay. A reply to objection 2. Anger and the like are attributed to God on account of a similitude of effect. Okay, so one thing we might say is, well, maybe there are, and I'm not a theologian. So if some theologians want to come in and say, hey, this philosophy thing is fun, but I've got some great insights from the realm where God is revealing things to us, please feel free to click the link and join us and help us out with all of this. But I wonder what they would say. Like, does this feel to them perhaps like that Aquinas is trying to, instead of explain and help us understand how it can be true that God is all these things, instead try to say, well, if it fits into my nice, clever box, like you could imagine a heretical, it would be a heretical theologian who would say the following, because we know it to be heresy from what the revealed truth people tell us. Well, God has a body. Just believe it literally. Like, obviously, he's got a nose with two nostrils and a physical body. Like, okay, somebody could read it that way. That's not, that would be heretical according to even the people who believe in revealed truth as the basis of coming to truth about these things, which Aquinas says is completely appropriate. It's just in this book, we're going to try to do philosophy. In any event, uh, I wonder if we could get some theologians in here to help us out with adding their voice to this. Okay. Thus, because to punish is properly the act of an angry man, God's punishment is metaphorically spoken of as his anger. That seems like a perfectly reasonable way to read the scripture, by the way. I mean, it seems more natural to understand that as the point of the verse and the meaning that's being given in those words that couldn't be given in any other way. Like, it's not like that's the best way to express it. It seems right. And again, we've got to reply to an objection that's based in nothing but an objector who has a very literal interpretation of what the Holy Writ is supposed to mean. In our day and age, we say, "Oh, you're reading it literally," and sometimes we confuse that with fundamentally, right? Where it's like, "Don't read it literally, just believe whatever you want." That's not the way we're talking about it. When we say you shouldn't be reading it literally, we're not saying don't take it seriously. We're not saying it would be foolish to do so. We're not saying there's no ultimately important truth in the text, and so just make up whatever you want. When we say don't read it literally, we mean read it the way it's meant to be understood, which is to give you a truth that your limited mind and the limiting words that you're using can't really wrap around, and understand it's pointing at something much bigger than that. That's all we mean by that. So reply to objection 3: forms which can be received in matter are individualized by matter, which cannot be in another, as in a subject, since it is the first underlying subject. Although form of itself, unless something else prevents it, can be received by many. But that form which cannot be received in matter, but is self subsisting, is individualized precisely because it cannot be received in a subject. And such a form is God. Mm. Hence, it does not follow that matter exists in God. So, with this one, instead of saying you read the scriptures the wrong way, what he's responding to instead is saying, "Yeah, I think I get it. You understand the idea of individualization and all of that. Your argument doesn't prove that God is composed. It only states that it leaves room open for the fact that he's not, or the idea that he's not. It's only that you are looking at the particular individuals of composed bodies and saying, well, this is how essence or soul or form is interacting with matter. That doesn't mean that those things cannot exist without that." Okay. That seems like a proper reply, whether it's true or not, but it's at least addressing directly the objection that was written there. All right. Let's see what happens next. Whether some of these questions you're going to say to yourself, why are we talking about form and essence? It's like, I thought we talked about molecules and electromagnetic fields. Like, what are these terms that these medievals are using to describe nature or being or theo, theo describe God himself? Like, what are these concepts they're employing when they're trying to make sense of things? Like, we just watched him parse out, like, well, could a thing that is a manifestation of a form, which normally is a participation of body with an organizational principle to become oak tree like or human like or whatever, could that form itself as a thing that can't be participating in anything else because it is the divine and it is uniquely separate from that, exist without a body to be entombed in or incorporated into or manifest in that way? And it's like, first of all, these are extremely sophisticated thinkers, much more so than we are. Secondly, Aristotelian physics is something that is still adhered to by a group of philosophers today who are neo-Aristotelians to one degree or another. And they basically just think, yeah, you kind of have the right terms to use for describing things. Um, I'm not advocating that view. I'm just saying, like, that is a thing that exists. It's not intellectually bankrupt or something. Thirdly, we should probably on the next video, I'll come back with definitions. Well, actually, the definitions are going to emerge as we read this. But if it seems strange to talk about things like this, we've already read these terms a lot and we've made sense of the passages. So we'll see about supplementing that, and maybe I can learn some things along the way. All right. Whether God is the same as his essence or nature. Okay, so we're talking about the essence of God, but is that what we mean by God? It seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature, for nothing can be in itself, but the substance or nature of God, i.e., the Godhead, is said to be in God. Therefore, it seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature. This is going to help us when he deals with the Trinity soon. Objection 2. Further, the effect is assimilated to its cause. All right. So, by the way, we're in the section about simplicity. If God was made up of an outside and an inside, or a left and a right, he is made up of, he is triunal. We understand that. But if there was a part of him that was, oh, that's very complicated. I'm trying to be careful not to accidentally and in my stupid philosophical milieu say things that are heretical. Not, we can consider all sorts of ideas, that's fine. But while we're dealing with Aquinas, the point here is to understand what he's saying. And I don't know how to talk about the Trinity properly. So actually, there's a lot we've said about the Trinity in other philosophical classes, but I hesitate. So when we're actually talking about God, it seems that God is not the same as his essence or nature, for nothing can be in itself, right? So like if you're in yourself, like, well, now there's an outside and an inside. There's a composition, right? There's this part and that part. But the substance, I believe the idea is that the Son part of God doesn't exist because the Son is the God, is the Son, Holy Spirit, and Son. So it's not a part. The part is the part that doesn't exist. It's not that the Son doesn't exist, but when you look at God and you say the Son and the Father and they're having a conversation, all of this is true, but our understanding of how it can be true, according to Aquinas, is that we need to understand that it's not like God, one part of God is over here and another part is over here, and there's a difference between them. It's that there's a triune nature to the divine, and there's no simpler way for me to explain it to humans. Which, by the way, um, we humans understand that there's a triune nature to being for sure, because any concept we use to try to understand or even present to ourselves a world as we interact with the world that's there to make it presentable to us as experiential has to rely on three notions, that any two of which mean nothing without the third, but all three of them together mean the one thing, which is, so these people didn't just, it's not like they said, I mean, Aquinas has or Aristotle has the same idea. And we've seen with C.S. Lewis that the pagans had a trinity in their godhead that was the one God beyond all of the silly little demigod facets of trying to understand that. And that trinity emerged for philosophical reasons. So nobody here is thinking these thoughts because, well, somebody told me I had to say it was triunal, so now I'll try to make it make sense about how it can be three and one at the same time. We'll get to the passages where we look at all of that. All we're getting from Aquinas right now is that, yes, when we get there, that's fine, But right now, you should know that whatever the Trinity is, it isn't an affirmation of the idea that God is dividable into parts. He is simple. With philosophical simplicity means not composed and incapable of being decomposed as well, but other things too. Okay, so objection two. Further, the effect is assimilated to its cause, for every agent produces its like. But in created things, the suppositum is not identical with its nature. For a man is not the same as his humanity. Therefore, God is not the same as his Godhead. On the contrary, he says, it is said of God that he is life itself. And not only that he is a living thing, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, and not only that, he is a living thing. Okay, not only that, he is a living thing. He is life itself. Now, the relation between Godhead and God is the same as the relation between life and a living thing. Therefore, God is his very Godhead. So this is not his argument, although there's a kind of an argument here about how to interpret the text of the scriptures, Holy Writ. But this is going to be his argument for why this is the case. Okay, let's we see his position clearly, and this is an important thing to do, is to know exactly what the position is. And when you're writing philosophically, you should say, don't hide what you think, say it so that people can attack it or judge it or see if it holds up. It is said of God that he is life itself, and not only that he is a living thing. Not only that, like not limited to that, he is life itself. I I am the way, the truth, and the life. Now, the relation between Godhead and God is the same as the relation between life and a living thing. Therefore, God is his very Godhead. Okay, so that's a statement of what he thinks. Let's see how he can prove it. I answer that God is the same as his essence or nature. Let's make this a little bit reasonable here. It's not gonna be all right. God is the same as his essence or nature. To understand this, it must be noted that in things composed of matter and form, the nature or essence must differ from the suppositum. Once again, the objectors are saying all of my examples of things are of terrestrial things, are of mortal things, are of limited things. And so I'm saying that's the only way it can be. But saying it's not the only way it can be is not enough. Aquinas has to show how it is possible that something could not be that like that. And of course, we're talking about God. He's fundamentally not like his creation in this. So, because the essence or nature connotes only what is included in the definition of the species, as humanity connotes all that is included in the definition of man, all right? So, to be human is to be a material mammal with intelligence and a soul that can move you around. But to have a soul that can move you around is not the definition of a man, because that is included in the definition of a man, but it's also true of crabs. It's also true of octopi or whatever else. So the essence or nature connotes only what is included in the definition of the species, the things that have to be included, and everything that matches that definition would be an example of a human. Humanity connotes all that is included in the definition of man, for it is by this that man is man, by whatever are in that definition. And it is this that humanity signifies. So the word humanity, could put in quotes, signifies that, namely whereby man is man. So the sufficient and necessary terms for saying, do you have a man? Check off the list. He's this, he's this, he's this, he's this, he's this, and he's not these things over here. Great. We've got an instance of a man here. We've separated out from all the trees and the dogs and the rocks and other things. Okay. Now, individual matter, with all of its individualizing agents, is not included in the definition of the species. Okay. So humanity is not the same as what would say this is Frank, who lives at 3427 Elm Street. Okay. That's not a part of the definition of being a man, even though someone who meets the definition of being a man, that could be true of him also. For this particular flesh, these bones, this blackness or whiteness, etc., are not included in the definition of a man. Therefore, this flesh, these bones, and the accidental qualities distinguishing this particular matter are not included in humanity. So, whatever makes you human can't be the things that only apply to individual humans. So we've got Frank over here, and we say, how do I know Frank is a man? Well, he has all these things we listed before, and he's right here. No, no, no. That part isn't a part of what makes him a man. It makes him this man. All right. So he's intelligent and he can move around and he's mortal and he's a mammal and he's made of matter and composed and all of those things that make you a man, if you take them all together, are a part of his definition that make him a human. If I say, in addition to that, he's standing right here, that might be, I can prove there is a particular man right here, but that has nothing to do with proving he is a human, that he is a man. And yet they are included in the thing which is man. Okay. Hence, the thing which is a man has something more in it than has humanity, more particulars to narrow it down to an individual. Consequently, humanity and a man are not wholly identical. But humanity is taken to mean the formal part. We'll pay attention to these words more later, but we're seeing how they're used. The formal part of a man, because the principles whereby a thing is defined are regarded as the formal constituent in regard to the individualizing matter. Okay, we've got a bunch of matter. Is it taking the form of a man? Is it's a man, right? It's a man if it's participating, if the matter is participating in the form of of humanity. On the other hand, in things not composed of matter, so he's saying to the objector again, you're looking at the particulars of our existence. You're not understanding God is qualitatively not like that. Things that are not composed, his simplicity, of matter and form, in which individualization is not due to individual matter. So it's not he's right here. He has a location. It's this clump of matter that makes up Frank. That's not what makes God an individual, because he's not made of matter, so it's not those particulars that you could point to understand his individuality, but he is uniquely himself. So his unique selfness isn't coming from being composed of matter, because he's not in the first place. So now why is he still talking? You'd think he would just say he's not composed of matter, therefore he doesn't have those qualities. But Aquinas has to demonstrate that something can be an individual, that something can be that is not composed of matter. That's why this argument's being made, right? So let's see how he goes. On the other hand, in things not composed of matter and form, in which individualization is not due to the individual matter, that is to say, to this matter, the very forms of being individualized of themselves. It is necessary the forms themselves should be subsisting supposita, suppositum, therefore, and nature in them are identified. Since God then is not composed of matter and form, he must be his own Godhead. There's no in and out, up and down, left and right. He is what he is. Okay. Now, it's possible that the I am what I am phrase, which isn't the way we can use it, I can say that when I'm doing the Popeye thing, but that's just, I'm this person. The being qua being, the thing that just is, the thing that names itself what is being itself and the source of all other things being, is not requiring the things that individual things require in order to be individualized, because he's not made of matter. So what is it that makes him he is that essence and nothing else, which means he isn't composite. All right. He's just that thing. I shouldn't say thing. You can't say anything positive, as he's pointed out, without it being a limiting term that isn't actually one really accurate. God is might be an accurate statement, but it's really hard to make positive statements beyond that that aren't in error in some way, if not understood poetically. Okay. Since God then is not composed of matter and form, he must be his own Godhead, his own life, and whatever else is thus predicated of him. We've already understood the nature of God from earlier, that it's something that doesn't require explanation for being. That has to be, there has to be something like that, and that's what we mean by God. Reply to objection one: we can speak of simple things only as though they were like the composite things from which we derive our knowledge. It's the best we can do, is what he's explaining again. Therefore, in speaking of God, we use concrete nouns to signify his subsistence, because with us, only those things subsist which are composite. And we use abstract nouns to signify his simplicity. So Aquinas is saying he has subsistence. Okay. But we can't talk about that because unless we use poetic language of solid particular nouns, the kinds of words that would only really apply to this particular Frank, but we're talking about humanity instead of Frank. We're talking about life qua life and the source of all those things and many others, which are all actually one thing, one essence that we're understanding from different angles. So again, Aquinas is saying, I want to understand as much as I can with my intellect. If I make positive statements, they're always going to be wrong in some way. And a lot of these objection cleanups here are illustrating why that's the case with the limitation of language while talking about the unlimited. But one thing I can do is clear out the wrong ideas in my head by making negative statements instead of positive statements. God is not a body. And then what I'm left with is at least getting me closer to the notion. Maybe I can know he exists logically and intellectually, but I can't really know him. I can't know him the way I need to know him through this entire project, perhaps, but I can at least do the work of getting rid of my bad ideas. And I came to them because I'm not like him, and the things I experience are not like him. And so, by getting rid of those ideas and then understanding how it is that he is not like those things, maybe I can get closer and perhaps we'll see if there's a need for revelation or not. If at that point God would have to still condescend to us and come down and touch us, which he already has affirmed is a thing. You don't have to do philosophy to know God. You can just be a person like all of us, a moron with grace, right? So you can get to those truths that way. But since we have intellect, let's see what thinking leads us to. Okay, in saying, therefore, that Godhead or life or the like are in God, we indicate the composite way in which our intellect understands, but not that there is any composition in God. That's a typical reply to this misunderstanding of poetry and the limitations of language. But let's see what he does with the second objection. He replies to the second objection by saying, the effects of God do not imitate him perfectly, but only as far as they are able. And the imitation is hereby defective, precisely because what is simple and one can only be represented by diverse things. Consequently, composition is accidental to them, and therefore, in them, suppositum is not the same as nature. Whoa, 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 whoa. This is starting to blow my hippie noodle here. Let's look at this second objection here. The argument that he doesn't agree with, that's going against this position, is saying further, the effect is assimilated to its cause. Oh, God is the cause of us being here. And so what are we like? Right? For every agent produces its like, fine. But in created things, the suppositum is not identical with its nature. Frank is not the same as humanity. Frank is a human, so he participates in humanity, but he's also Frank. God made Frank and humanity. So God is probably like the things he's making, and the things he's making are like that. All right. That's the argument. And then Aquinas says, no, wait, hold on a second. The effects of God, are his creation, do not imitate him perfectly, but only insofar as they are able. Right? You can't have a physical limited creation. Like God is unlimited. He made himself mortal and limited and torn to pieces at the foundation of the earth so that he could communicate. Shouldn't say so that. Enabling, and that's the foundation of creation, so that he can deal with the limited things and speak into them what's necessary for them to be. But those things that are approximations of like he's giving us being, and so we're as close as we can to God, expressing what we can. But there's a difference between things that are particularized in a material form and the source of being itself. And so precisely because what is simple in one cannot be represented except by many diverse things, consequently composition is accidental to them, and therefore in them supposition is not the same as nature. There's a group of people online, perhaps some of them are watching this video right now, who were and are, and for many good reasons, fans of Scott Adams. Scott Adams was extremely intelligent individual. Wrote a philosophy text most people don't know about. Most people think of him as the Dilbert guy. If any of you are listening right now, any of those people are listening right now, the effects of God do not imitate him perfectly, but only so far as they are able, and the imitation is here defective, precisely because what is simple and one can only be represented by diverse things. Consequently, composition is accidental to them, and therefore in them, supposition is not the same as nature. Where did we come from? I'm not sure I want to spell this out anymore. For those of you who are very, very clever and careful listeners and readers and thinkers, God becomes limited, torn to pieces to create the world. I mean, it's at the foundation of being, at least. I don't want to say anything heretical, and I'm not a theologian, and we'll welcome a theologian who wants to come in. From the foundations of the earth, the lamb that was slain, that's held up, holy, holy, holy. The divine, in love, perhaps for what is not like him, not unlimited, but for the limited. I don't want to say the poetic expression of all of this same idea that came from theologian, philosopher, prophet, whatever you want to think. Avatar is the word he invented for it, Scott Adams. But those of you who know that book might be shocked to find this idea here, and we'll move on. Um, but what it tells us, and what's important about this here, is what it's telling us is that God is not made of parts. Okay, and so he's not like the things that are reflections of his glory and goodness to varying degrees to whatever potential they have to actualize that as individuals. He's not like them, so he's not composed, and so therefore his essence can be what he is. He is that. He is what he is, and nothing else, and not with parts. And it's really hard for us temporal, limited, embodied creatures to wrap our heads around something like that. It might probably impossible for us to, or to speak accurately about it. But we're going to try to keep going forward with apophatic approaches or poetic positive approaches. All right. Whether essence and existence are the same in God. What about his existence? Now, if you've been listening carefully, we should expect Aquinas to say no to this question. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Sorry, the opposite. We should expect the objector to say no, which is the next thing we're going to read, right? We should expect that as anything we can say about God is all one thing. So it wouldn't be true that God is simple. We're on the simplicity of God section. So is God simple? Well, he wouldn't be simple if his essence and his existence were two different things. So the objector should say that they're not the same thing. And we should expect that. Okay. It seems that essence and existence are not the same in God. For if it be so, then the divine being has nothing added to it. Now, being to which no addition is made is universal being, which is predicated of all things. So far, so good. Goes along with a lot of what Aquinas is saying. Therefore, it follows that God is being in general, which can be predicated of everything. But this is false. For man, all right, so no wonder it sounded like Aquinas. He was about to say he doesn't agree with this. So he says it seems like that, but it's false. For men gave the incommunicable name to stones and wood. Therefore, God's existence is not his essence. Well, that seems like a bad argument. Obviously, this verse has to do with man doing something faulty in relationship to the notion of God. But if you read it literally and say, man accomplished the giving of this, right? He accomplished the incommunicable to things that I'm communicating to you. Well, obviously, he didn't. But that was his error, was trying or thinking he had. In his mind, he was wrong when he thought he did. Okay, so clearly that's an easy explanation to get rid of that misinterpretation of scripture there. But The rest of this is actually going to sound just like Aquinas. He's saying, all right, you're on board now. You get how this thinking works. So you're on your heels. You're not just telling me it seems like they're not the same for all these reasons. You're saying, well, it seems like they're not the same. Or maybe I've got this completely wrong. Maybe, maybe Aquinas is going to do the opposite of what I think. And it's just so complicated for me that I'm not anticipating it very well. But yeah, no, he's saying that they're not the same as an objector. So then he gives a whole Aquinian kind of reasoning to say, I know what you're going to say. You're going to say that it could make sense that they're the same thing, blah, blah, blah. But remember this verse. So that's the whole objector. So let's move on from objector one. Objector two. Further, we can know whether God exists as said above. We figured that out, but we cannot know what he is. So if I can know in my mind that he is, but not know him entirely or even have personal knowledge of him, or relational knowledge of him, but if I can do those separately, then those are two separate ideas. And uh, so how can I know that he is and not know him unless his being is different than his essence? Straightforward argument. Therefore, God's existence is not the same as his essence, that is, as his quiddity or nature. On the contrary, and so he's going to quote a source and state what he thinks, and then he's going to give us the argument after. Hilary says, in God, existence is not an accidental quality, but subsisting truth. Therefore, what subsists in God is his existence. His essence is his existence. It's to be. I am that I am, is what he said. It's to be, being qua being. So what he is being. So his essence and his existence are the same. So let's see if we can get an argument for that. I answer that God is not only his own essence, as shown in the previous article, but also his own existence. Those are not two separate things. This may be shown in several ways. First, whatever a thing has besides its essence must be caused either by the constituent principles of that essence, by something external, right? Like a property that necessarily accompanies the species, as a faculty of laughing is proper to a man and is caused by the constituent principles of the species, or by an exterior agent, right? So if you were the sort of thing that could be separate from your essence, whatever's separate from your essence is either caused by you necessarily from your essence or by something else, as heat is caused by in water by fire. So that's a great statement, really quickly, of the Aristotelian physics. Heat is caused in water by fire. There's fire, there's water. Water is cold and damp, fire is hot and light. But the heat property is given to water to make it boiling hot water when it's coming in contact with fire. Therefore, if the existence, so what is that? There's an essence of fire, there's an essence of water, and there's a communication of uh, w- uh, um, let's try to use this language. Is it a constituent principle? No. Uh, the property. I'm sorry, that's the word I'm supposed to be using here. New to this way of thinking a little bit, trying to keep up with it. So the property of heat is transferred by the one essence which has it in its essence. That's what it means to be fire, in a sense. Like we were defining humanity earlier, what it means to be fire includes the concept of heat. And that property, though, is transmitted to okay, fine. So it's either one of two ways. So if you're talking about something that has its existence separate, its essence separate from any other part of it, it either gets that other part as a necessary consequence of its essence or from something else. Okay, that's fair enough. Disjunction is set up. Therefore, if the existence of a thing differs from its essence, this existence must be caused by either some external agent or by the essential principle, its own essential principles. Now, it is impossible for a thing's existence to be caused by its essential constituent principles, for nothing can be the sufficient cause of its own existence, except one thing, if its existence is caused. Okay, pause. It is impossible that anything other than God, we're talking about things whose existence is caused. If you're talking about those things, it is impossible for those things to have a separation between their essences and something else that is caused by their essence. You wouldn't be able to distinguish it. That would just be included in as a part of the essence, I think. Think. Therefore, that thing whose existence differs from its essence, if there's anything that has an existence differing from its essence, must have its existence caused by another, if we're talking about things that are caused at all. But this, oh, if we're talking about things that are caused at all, or we're talking about things that are not caused at all because they're being qua being, but in that case, their essence, all expressions of their essence are a part of their essence. So if God's existence were separate from his essence, it would necessarily be anyway. It's just his essence. There's no, you can't make a distinction there, is I think what's happening. You can't make it. So, in order to see that, pretend we're not talking about God. Let's pretend we're talking about some object. Okay. So, this object has the essence of that makes it, it's participating in the form that makes it a plastic water bottle. Um, it, if there's anything else about it, like it's in this location, it's right here in my hand. That's a feature of this particular water bottle that's not a property of its essence. Its essence, you can be a water bottle and not be in my hand right now. If it were necessary that the water bottle be in my hand to be a water bottle, all water bottles would be in my hand right now, and nothing that's not in my hand wouldn't be a water bottle. So clearly, being in this location has nothing to do with what makes it water bottle. Okay. Now, we've separated two ideas out of something like this. This is a contingent being that owes its explanation to a whole bunch of other contingent beings and ultimately to the existence of God, which created everything. So, this thing, if I separate a quality of it from its essence, like it's right here, it owes its explanation for being right here to the fact that I picked it up a second ago. If it had to be here because bottleness requires it to be here, it wouldn't require me to do anything, and all water bottles would be here, as I said before. So, take something that is created, that is made, that is contingent, that is composite, and ask yourself, does it make any sense to say of things that, of truths about it that are not its essence, that they're caused by its essence? So let's look at other qualities of the bottle now, things that are essential to it. It's made of plastic. It can't be a plastic bottle unless it's made of plastic. Is that caused by its essence? It's necessitated by its essence. We wouldn't call it a plastic water bottle if it was made of wood, right? But is that the only category left is stuff that is essential to it, right? Can I take any of the qualities of this water bottle that aren't a part of its definition that makes it a water bottle and separate them out and say, "Oh, that was caused by its essence. It's not its essence." Well, no, because anything that's in that category is either caused by someone else because it's a created thing that can have that happen, or what are you talking about? If it's necessarily plastic bottle shapeness and all of the other things that essentially make something a plastic bottle, if it's that, what could you talk about this water bottle that wouldn't fit into the particulars of just this water bottle, but the essence of being a water bottle that isn't a part of its essence? There's no category left for that. So whatever's true of God is true of his essence because he's not like those created things, and the only category you have is his essence. His existence, if you can affirm it because of our arguments earlier, his existence has to be a part of his very essence, which of course we're talking about being itself. So being is being, its existence. That's the essence of what we mean by God. This cannot be true of God because we call God the first efficient cause. Therefore, it is impossible that in God his existence should differ from his essence. That was the first argument. Let's see a second. Secondly, existence. Did I even understand this argument at all? It's impossible. He's doing a disjunction and he's saying, okay, with these things, you separate this. With this, you only have the one category. With this, if you did separate them, nothing that wasn't over here could be anything other than here. You can't really say the essence is causing a thing that isn't caused by anything else. It's just that's what it means to be the essence at that point. I think that's what he's saying. Perhaps not. Maybe we need a better philosopher here to see if there's something else going on. This is so profoundly impacting. He's saying at least as much as what I just said. And the impact of that is Phenomenal. Let's just say that. It's phenomenal. You're choosing that word carefully. All right. Secondly, existence is that which makes every form or nature actual. Mhm. Okay. If there's a potential rabbit that isn't there actually, okay, what do you mean? Well, maybe next year there'll be a rabbit there. I don't know. All right. You've got to be actual to be in existence. The rabbit that I'm imagining might exist next year isn't actual unless time goes by and he becomes actual. So existence that applies to the actual. For goodness and humanity are spoken of as actual only because they are spoken of as existing. Goodness exists, humanity exists. We're taking some forms, some abstract concepts. Those things exist, but only because, well, they're spoken of as actual for that reason. Therefore, existence must be compared to essence, if the latter is a distinct reality, as actuality to potentiality. So, existence is an essence, and it's God's essence. Since in God there is no potentiality, as shown above in Article 1, it follows that in him essence does not differ from existence. All right, these people are too smart for me, so I'm going to have to read this really slowly and carefully and make sure I'm following every step here. This is a very Socratic move here, right? If you've got two categories, essence or existence is like this, right? Um, existence is that which makes every form. I know we're talking about the scholastics, but you see some Plato tripping. I like pointing it out when I see it. Secondly, existence is that which makes every form or nature actual. Uh-huh. For goodness and humanity are spoken of as actual only because they are spoken of as existing. Is that a particular versus an abstract reason, or it must be? Therefore, existence must be compared to, oh, it might not be because goodness can exist without particular humans and particular things. So he's saying for goodness and humanity are spoken of as actual. Yeah, it's actually true that there is humanity. That's an actual truth because there are a lot of individual humans. It's also true that there is actually goodness, not because of a bunch of particulars, but because of the source of all goodness, because goodness qua goodness itself exists in the essence of God, which is not what he's discussing right now. But both of these things are said to exist actually. Therefore, existence must be compared to essence. Is that what he's doing here? If the latter is a distinct reality, if essence is a distinct reality. Okay, so he's looking at forms, he's looking at essences and say they exist actually. Um, and so therefore essence is a thing that can actually exist, and so we're looking at the question of positive or negative on existence, saying yes must be compared to essence. So this existence thing we're talking about is, wow, man, I feel like Plato would have taken me through this just as difficultly. This is hard for me. This is a mountaintop experience of trying to walk. Let's see if we can hold our hands with each other and see if we can make that. Maybe it's much easier to you, but I feel like Plato would have used literary form and it would have been a longer version, and eventually it would have been just as hard a climb. He's doing this in so few sentences that I can be thrown off the trail too easily. Existence is so let's see if let's see if we can hold, maybe even read to the end here and see if we can hold our own hands and try to walk this with him. Existence is that which makes every form or nature actual. Got it? Goodness, and essence, humanity and essence are said to be actual only because they're spoken of as existing. Those things themselves exist, not just individual humans or a good thing or a nice event or something, a good event or something like that. Therefore, existence must be compared to essence if the latter is a distinct reality. There's a distinct reality in the essences, so therefore existence must be compared to essence as actuality to potentiality. Okay, it is an analogy. All right. Analogy arguments are the hardest to follow. And I keep bringing up that Plato uses them a lot. And in the Meno and in, I think, the Phaedo, we're going to see a parallel to this exact argument here, I believe. But the same intellectual moves are being made. So let's add a lot of words to this argument that we can borrow from an analogy to this argument, which is a different argument by Plato, using the same intellectual move and see if it doesn't make it clearer for myself and for you. If unless you get it, you click the link and join in here and feel free to help us out. Okay, so let's add a few words. If we're asking the question, what is existence more like? Is it more like an essence or is it more like a potentiality? Is it more like an actuality or a potentiality? That's the first step. Is essence, we'll do it like Socrates. So, Fido, would you say, yes, Socrates, I would say, would you say that existence is more like an actuality or a potentiality? Golly gee, I'm just not sure, Socrates. Well, let's think about it this way. Is es Let's look at other essences like goodness and humanity. Are they said to be actual or just potential? Most assuredly, they're actual. Uh-huh. So that's what's happening here. There's a lot of moves happening here that I could have used a few more paragraphs to try to follow, but it would have been just as hard. So, so existence is properly thought of as essential, as an essential kind of thing rather than an offshoot kind of thing, because goodness and humanity and other abstract things are said to actually exist. No, he's making two moves, maybe with two analogies, and I'm making them both at the same time. I need to go slower here. Existence is said to be actual and also said to be essential. Okay, so we've got two moves here. We're trying to get from existence and essence link. So existence and essence link. These things exist actually, but particulars exist actually too. So is this argument even sound? Oh, Father God, I'm getting more confused as I read it. So sorry. I was closer a moment ago. Let's just read it one more time. Secondly, existence is that which makes every form or nature actual. Existence, oh, right. Right. Got it. Okay. Existence is what makes a particular thing actual, and essences themselves are actual. So essences exist. So existence is properly related to essence anyway, right? Of course. Oh my God. It's so simple. It's just we're morons compared to our ancestors. We're just morons. Let's do this again. The bottle. What's the definition of the essence of the meaning of saying correctly it is a plastic bottle? Not just this particular plastic bottle here, but of being a plastic bottle. It has to be. Part of its essence is it has to be. This is not a plastic bottle. You could say this is why I said it's so phenomenal. This is made of plastic and it's in the shape of a bottle and it can hold a fluid and it has a lockable top. You can say all sorts of things about this, but if this doesn't exist actually, it isn't actually a bottle because existence is a part of the essence of being any of these things and of being more abstract things as well. Okay. The arguments are not hard to understand. They're impossible for stupid people like me to follow. That's the trick. Therefore, since in God there is no potentiality, as shown above in Article 1, it follows that in his essence does not his I'm sorry, that his in him that in him that in him essence does not differ from existence, as we read before. Okay, therefore, his essence and his existence. His essence is his existence. We're going to see this because God is simple about all things. His existence is his justice, is his all knowledge, is his mercy, is every. He is simple. We're starting to get to that, but we're going to have to see how that can be each step along the way. So I want to look at this more again, but I feel like I'll be boring everybody. We could pull up a whiteboard and maybe I could try to draw this out. Not trying to be too indulgent here, but I don't feel good about moving on when there's something I'm not really understanding. And I can say some partial things about it. It's like, no, how about we actually get it? Oh, look, I spelled. I wrote whiteboard Aquinas instead of online whiteboard. That was helpful. Okay. It's too bad we can't share 2 screens at the same time. I don't wanna bore you all, but, this little argument here, I'd really like to, take a quick look at it, see if I can't come to understand some more about it. Oh, that was not helpful. Okay, well, here. Okay, simple little argument, but not so simple for my simple mind. All right, let's see if this helps. Existence is that which makes every form or nature actual. Yeah, this water bottle ain't actual. It ain't real. It's kind of weird I'm talking about it as a water bottle. This one is because it exists. That's part of the essence of it being a water bottle is it being to begin with. Got it. Goodness and humanity are spoken of as actual. Even more abstract things, they're actual. Only because they're spoken of as existing. There is such a thing as humanity. There is such a thing as goodness. So those things also exist. Therefore, existence must be compared to essence. If the latter, so of all the particular things and the abstract things and the formal things and the essential, like it's in the essence. If the latter is a distinct reality as actuality to potentiality. Therefore, since in God there is no potentiality, so he's not like water bottles, as shown above, it follows that in him essence is all that's left to place his existence. Therefore, his essence is his existence. We're gonna just leave it at that. Let's see the third argument. Thirdly, it's pretty good. Because just as that which has fire, but is not itself fire, is on fire by participation, so that which has existence, but is not existence, is a being by participation. So if God's existence were not in his essence, then he's getting his existence from somewhere else. It's a ontological Euthyphroian problem, right? You follow me? It's like, is God good because he wants to adhere to goodness, or is goodness good because God is good? Like, how is God good? How is God being? He's not being because of any other principle. He's not contingent. There's not necessary sufficient cause to make him come into being. He is being. And you wouldn't be able to do science or anything else or have a world of things that are described in a different way unless there was something that was like that. And all the things that we are participating in that being to some degree or not. We're getting our being from him. In him we live and move and have our being. Thirdly, all right, so the only other option then would be for God to get his existence from something else if it's not in his essence. That don't work logically, all right? So but God is his own essence as shown above in article 3. So if therefore he is not his own existence, he will not he will be not essential, but participated being. It's like, oh, God's there, but the fire of being which is outside God burns and allows him to be. That doesn't work. Well, that doesn't work. Okay. We know that if that was how it worked, what we meant by God would be that, or just the fire, or the whole thing together. So all we have is God, and that we're looking to understand here. And so whatever his existence is, which we know he has, he doesn't have it. We attribute existence to him. It's his essence. So another way of saying the same thing. God is his own essence, is not essential, but a participating being. He will not therefore be the first being, which is absurd, or otherwise that wasn't what we were talking about. If you're thinking about a God that gets his being from something else, we're talking about that thing that he gets his being from. That's what we mean by God, and that's what we're using our logic to analyze what that is. So now you've changed the subject from God to demigod, lesser God, created being. It doesn't work. If we're going to stick to the subject and talk about God, we discover that we're necessarily talking about something whose being and existence is his essence. No distinction. No top, left, bottom, right, north, south, parts. God is a simple. So if he has existence and an essence, those are the same, as well as everything else that we can attribute to him. He will not therefore be the first being, which is absurd. Therefore, God is his own existence and not merely his, and not, therefore, God is his own existence and not merely his own essence. Okay. Reply to objection one: a thing that has nothing added to it can be of two kinds. So imagine, let's just pause for a second because this is the first time we've gotten to a text where you get to see how hard it is. Well, maybe you've been able to see it all along, but where it's pretty obvious how hard it is for me to follow along and grasp these concepts. So let's pause for a second and say, um, we are the retarded offspring of these people. Well, let's make a comment not about us though, about what it is that we're witnessing here. That's what I meant to talk about. So Aquinas is saying this is going to be a difficult task. If we were just a group of philosophers talking about physics, that would be pretty easy and straightforward. We could do that. If we were going to talk about ethics, we could probably do that. It's going to get pretty godlike talk. And there's some virtue and some essence of goodness stuff, but like we're pretty far away from. What are we going to do as philosophers if the subject we want to study right now is God? Um, well, God has given us spirit to commune with him, so we might know him in a way that matters more, but he's also given us intellect. And as intelligent creatures, little ants in this giant cathedral, as we're seeing, that spins in all the possible, doesn't spin, but exists as a sphere in all possible directions, as we're seeing from C.S. Lewis's showing us how the medievals thought of their place in the cosmos. We're in the lowest place, and there's height everywhere, not just distance everywhere. Um, as these tiny little ants in a cathedral with intelligence, as well as spirit, with intelligence, what can we understand about God? And he says, well, it, good news and bad. This is going to be rough. First of all, there's a lot we can know about him because he can condescend to us. He can reach down and we have spirit and we're going to put all that aside. What can we do with our intelligence? Well, boy, oh boy, there's a lot we can say about God. But it's really hard to do it unless we're being poetic. So we've got poetry, but that's not really making propositional philosophical statements. And so we can sort of deal with the poetry and understand it differently and not literally if we can understand how to talk propositionally in statements like this. But how can we make these kinds of statements? This is what's left for us philosophers. We're dealing with, here's a statement. Does it have a truth value of yes or no? This is my proposition. Here's my syllogism for supporting it. How can we ever make a statement like that about God when that is composed of words and definitions, and those are limiting, and we're trying to talk accurately about something that isn't like that? So poetically, we could use words for it, and song and music and poetry, and Holy Writ has literary devices in it to point us. That's great. Spirit, travel, spirit man, figure that out. Whatever. That's all good. We're not against that. But what are we lowly philosophers going to do when trying to understand the divine with our intellect if we know ahead of time that all of our statements are going to be wrong in some way? He says, well, the first thing we can do is we can just make a list of wrong statements. God is a body would be a wrong statement. So I'll negate that statement and I'll say God is not a body. That's a positive active statement, but it's not a positive statement about God. It's a negative statement about God. God is not composed of parts. God's essence is not different from any other thing you can know about God, partially in all those other ways that you might possibly know, because that's positive knowledge and it's all very complicated. But the true statements as a philosopher, and we'll see the God of the philosophers, as it's been called, emerging out of this, is that, well, my dumb intellect is not going to get it. So let me get rid of all the ideas that aren't correct and see what I'm left with. And that's the journey we're on. So, uh, so that's the first complication. The complication for us and reading C.S. Lewis is the discarded image, and we're going to keep doing Aquinas as we're doing right now, but eventually there'll be more supplemental classes where we bring in other texts to say, how are these medievals thinking? And we did 4 hours and 45 minutes, which was awesome, of Aristotle quotes, and we were reading through texts of Aristotle in in various texts that Roger put together. We're going to try to understand the way they're thinking and how they're using these words. And you should know that there are neo-Aristotelians today in philosophy that go, yeah, no, I get it. This is actually the right way to think about it. Those scientists are going to have to give up some of their ideas, and their experiments are forcing them to right now, because these ideas actually make more sense and how to make sense of physics and things like that. Um, So we'll try to do that as well. But one of the added complications, besides the fact that doing theology like this in an apophatic way is necessary and difficult for the philosopher because the subject matter doesn't lend itself to be encompassed by words. It's also the fact that this is very Aristotelian and it's a different way of thinking than we're used to, although it might be superior. It might give insights if we know how to adopt it, even if we don't adjudicate that it's superior. And in any case, we don't know how to understand the arguments he's making unless we can understand them in the context that they're given. And so we're going to keep doing all of that. Um, but all that's being said here, and quite well, is that it would be an error to say that God started to exist, that God's existence is separate from his essence, that God depends upon his existence on some other principle. None of that makes sense. Being qua being. Now, notice if you're mystical, religious, devout, you believe in divine revelation, the stories from the mythopoetic realm have God announcing himself as I am that I am. It's possible that our understanding of that text is tainted by the fact that we're the children of these philosophers who've got a bunch of notions on it, and this is all wrong. Or it's also possible that not only is that true and the way we think of it, but philosophers can come to understand that. The point of this project is how much can I know about God and other things just doing philosophy, right? So Aquinas never makes the misstep as a philosopher of saying, this is true because the Bible tells me so. That's a fine thing to do, he thinks, if within the context of arguments of is this really scripture? And there's a lot of whatever. We're not doing that. We're doing this. We're saying, how much can I know? And apparently, it turns out what we can know through reading this, he's taking us step by step, is that not only must God exist, but his existence itself must be the same as his essence. He is being qua being. And that anything else that I can think about God that is true is also true, essentially true. It is his essence to be those things, and that those things are not actually different from each other, which is all wrapped in with the hardest concept that we're going to deal with. We're going to deal with God's eternality and other really fun things next. But the first thing he deals with is God's simplicity, because all those other things, his justice and his love and his mercy, they are essential to him. They are one thing, and metaphorically, I'm making a positive statement, so it's wrong in some sense, right? That's what we're understanding. They are actually one thing. The one thing is the essence, is the being. He is the source of all truth, being, justice, goodness, and love, and all of those are one thing. Good luck, humans, wrapping your head around that. You're not gonna, but we can talk about it carefully and make the statements we've made so far with keeping in mind that any positive statement is necessarily wrong because it's limiting. Okay. He will not therefore be the first being, which is absurd. He's not the first being. Oh, sorry. That would lead to him not being the first being. He's not the first thing that is created. He's not the first thing that comes into being. He just is being. Therefore, God is his own existence. We read that. Okay. Reply to objection one. A thing that has nothing added to it can be of two kinds. Okay. So we said God has nothing added to it. So now we're going to do the Aristotelian. Let's make distinctions and categories. There's only two ways that something fits in the category of nothing is added to it. Either its essence precludes any addition, it's not possible to give it anything. Thus, for example, it is of the essence of an irrational animal to be without reason. You can't put an injection of reason into a squid. Well, maybe a squid. I don't know. You can't put it into a rock and have it start making rock philosophy arguments for you. You can't put coldness in injection form into fire if the essence of fire is hotness. If it's not hotness, then you would be able to do that, and that would be fine with the same physical structure. You would just now have a new understanding of fire. But if something is of the essence, if its essence precludes something being added to it, that's one way that it cannot have something added to it. Or we may understand a thing to have nothing added to it, inasmuch as its essence does not require anything should be added to it. Thus, the genus animal is without reason, because it is not of the essence of animal to have reason in general. But neither is it to lack reason, because man is an animal that is reasonable, that has reason, access to thinking, right? And so the divine being has nothing added to it in the first sense, whereas universal being has nothing added to it in the second sense. So his reply to the objection is, wait, you said that it can't be the same thing. He says, there's two ways that you cannot have anything added to you. And the first way is the one we're talking about here with the divine, obviously. And the first way is that you don't need anything. There's no space for you to receive something. There's no lack that could be made up. God's not there broken saying, I wish, I wish, I wish I only had, and then something gets added to him. The reason why God can't have anything added to him is he's full, he's complete, he's everything. He lacks necessity. He lacks limit. He lacks anything to be added of necessity. And so you can't add anything. Reply, and that explains away the objection that you had that his essence and existence wouldn't be the same thing, which I don't even remember what that argument was. It seems that his essence exists. Another same thing for to be so is the divine being. Oh yeah, he's just saying, well, yeah, that all makes a lot of sense. But remember this verse: men gave to the incommunicable, gave to the incommunicable the names of stone and wood. So he gave. It's a bad argument, I think, but maybe not. Um, Aquinas has not done a lot of straw manning here, so the first way I interpreted it would have made it better. And maybe Aquinas is addressing it in that better form. So, man gave the incommunicable name to stone, the incommunicable name to stones and wood. Right? You make an idol, but he's saying you can't add anything to God's essence in the first sense, not the second. You can be wrong about him. Is this him saying that they were allowed to be wrong about God? Like, I think there's nothing added can be of two kinds. Nothing added. Oh, okay, good. So God had something added. He had names added, or he had his name added to something else. Am I just not reading this apocryphal verse properly? Maybe I'm not gonna be able to do this unless we look at this. My understanding of what it meant was in error, obviously. Um, God's existence is not his essence. As he received something. That's what he's banking that argument on, obviously, I guess. So, and then this says, well, you cannot give something. Oh, maybe, maybe the objector and Aquinas, being that the objector is Aquinas writing, but maybe they both have a very sophisticated understanding of that story, which is that that's not meant to be correct, that they actually could do that. We're going to need a better expert than me to parse out exactly what that is. But this argument is perfectly sound, and it's actually the argument. It is in agreement all the way here. He says, but even though that all seems correct, what about this verse? Men gave the incommunicable name to stones and wood. It seems that essence and existence are not the same in God, for if it be so, then the divine being has nothing added to it. Now, right? If you can add something, that's the whole argument. Oh my gosh. If you can add something to something, then its essence and existence are not the same. Hey, we gave God names, so his essence is not the same. I see. And then he says, so his response to that argument is, well, there's two ways in which you can't possibly give something to something. In the first way is clearly what we're talking about here. The second way, that's fine. Like you can give names to things. Must be what this boils down to. Let's see. A thing that has nothing added to it can be of two kinds. Either its essence precludes any addition, so it's not possible to give it anything. So you didn't really give God something. That's not a part of his essence that you gave. Oh, good. Now I have this name too. I didn't have it before. He's saying that's not what that verse means. That's what he's saying. Or we may understand thing that has nothing added to it, as much as its essence does not require that anything should be added to it. Thus, the genus animal is without reason, It's not in the essence of an animal, but if you gave a certain animal reason, then you could have an example of something like that. Neither is it to lack reason. So it's not in the essence of animal to have reason or to lack reason. And so the divine being has nothing added to it in the first sense, whereas the universal being has nothing added to it in the second sense. So you thought that verse meant that we added something to the sufficiency of the essence of what God was when we gave him a name. That's silly. That's more like the second sense. Okay. I'm going to move on from this. One of the things, this is what I meant to pause on earlier and I forgot. One of the things that you might consider while we're reading this, and is that imagine being a lawyer. For some of you, it will be easier than others. Imagine being a lawyer and how the law is amazing. It's really miraculous. It's a lot. How carefully we have to consider all the particular little cases with slightly different things and how to apply the law and all of this. And how seriously you have to think about this dwarfs that. Are these people who are thinking seriously about these things are so comfortable using these things, these terms. I have to catch up, obviously, as we go along, and so it's taking. This is the first time, but it's taking a lot of rereading as we go. But it's impressive, is all I mean to say. And they're not just thinking about God that way. This is how they're thinking about his creation. This is how they're thinking about when they're doing physics or mathematics or whatever. And it's serious thinking, is all I'm pointing out. This isn't a bunch of people who said, I got an idea. I think the Bible means this. Let's just talk about it. Like, no, you've never thought this seriously about anything in your life, most likely. Neither have I. To, to be, even if we've done a lot of serious thinking, to be can mean either of two things. It may mean the act of essence, or it may mean the composition of a proposition affected by the mind in joining a predicate to a subject. Taking to be in the first sense, we cannot understand God's existence nor his essence, but only in the second sense. We know that this proposition, which we form about God when we say God is true, and this we know from his effects. We've seen that before in his arguments for God's existence. We know the statement is true that God exists. That's not, we know his essence from that. We don't have propositional arguments where you can have relational saving knowledge of God. You're going to have to go somewhere else, he's saying, for that, besides the philosopher. Whether God is contained in a genus. I don't know how much of this we're going to get through today. I think actually, oh, this is the last one. No, it's not. Of course not. One, two, three, four. Okay. So we have four more questions left. Um, we'll pause here. We'll pause here. And what we've been doing is reading through the Summa Theologica by Thomas Aquinas. There's at least 12 or so videos of that you can catch up on if you want to. We've done a lot of supplementary videos looking at Aristotelian sources and Platonic ones from now and back in the day. Contemporary. We've looked at a lot of different things to supplement this, and we're reading through the Discarded Image by C.S. Lewis to try to understand the way the medieval people thought about the cosmos by examining the literature and the poetry that they found that was popular, that the layperson resonated with. And that's giving us a really astonishing view of the cosmos that's kind of breaking my brain lately as I try to incorporate it into my way of thinking, because it goes back to assumptions that I've had since I was like 4 or something, as people have told me what things are like. And it turns out there's other ways of thinking about everything you look at the starry sky. And so anyway, we're doing that to try to understand the way Aquinas and the people who maybe aren't quite as learned as him, but everybody in the culture is thinking the water they're swimming in and how they think. We're going to have other supplementary classes in the future as well, and we'll come back once we're done with C.S. Lewis to other sources to aid in that as well, and we'll probably look at some Aristotle that parallels a lot of what we've been reading here. In addition, so there's a lot of other things that are being added to this, but our project is to read through the Summa Theologica and have good discussion. I'm not preparing a lot of lectures here. I'm talking off the top of my dome, which isn't quite as good if it was to be called lectures. What I was hoping to do was to find a few enthusiastic people who wanted to have some good conversation, and we could just sort of get together and stumble through this like a group project. So I'm happy to keep doing it the way I'm doing it, but I've got the link out there for you to join the video. And the idea was that we could all just sort of get together and say, I'm going to die one day. Maybe I should read through this first, and that could be a good use of my time. So if you're enjoying listening, that's wonderful, and we're glad to have you here. But if anybody would like to come in and discuss it, this is what we're doing, and I'm happy to continue. I'm gonna continue. If the internet dies tomorrow, I'm just gonna keep doing this. But this is what we're doing. So we're gonna do this. I'm looking at this, but you're not seeing that. Okay, so that's that. Um, we didn't have a simultaneous sip, but we might if as we close and end the video, and perhaps I'll come on later tonight and read the rest of those articles, and we'll move out of the simplicity of God into the perfection of God, which is the next section. So maybe we'll come in and we'll finish later tonight. But for now, as we close, if you have it, and I know you do, you wouldn't forget. You get your cup, your mug, your glass, your tankard, your chalice, your thermos, or your stein. You get your canteen, your jug, your flask, your vessel of any kind, and you fill it with your favorite liquid. Coffee is always the best. Ooh, I just finished another one of those Italian espresso sodas. Mm. And you join me now for the unparalleled pleasure, the dopamine hit of the day, the thing that makes everything better. I hope you have a good night after this. It's called the simultaneous sip, and it happens right now. Go. Stuff. That's some good stuff. All right, we're going to wrap it up. We'll see you maybe later tonight, but we'll see you later. See you next time.